I've covered Galaga. I've covered Pac-Man. It's about time we talked about the game that put Namco on the map, Galaxian. Released in 1979, Galaxian was the first massive success Namco really had in the US, and was a massive jump in gameplay and graphics when compared to Space Invaders, which released the year prior. While the ships did still spawn at the same time in a set order, they no longer stay static in that position, instead flying down at the player in set patterns. This meant the player had more to worry about when compared to Space Invaders, as Galaxian had both enemy fire and kamikaze aliens to deal with. Galaxian was a huge hit in Japan and absolutely smashed the charts in the US, which meant ports were a given. So of fucking course Atari felt the need to grab rights to it. Oddly enough, ports of Galaxian didn't really start releasing until the mid-80s. Atari had two main console ports of Galaxian, one for the 2600 and one for the 5200. And while you might expect the 2600 port to just suck, it manages to actually function for the most part. The 2600 managed to run the game with pretty faithful logic when compared to the arcade. The aliens all act as one might expect, with fine controls and very Atari-looking sound and graphics. There's really not much to say here, it plays perfectly fine. Atari 5200's Galaxian, on the other hand, is just ass. The Atari 5200 uses an analog joystick with no self-centering mechanism, which means your ship is always moving regardless of where you put the stick. This makes the game uncontrollable. The graphics really don't look too much better than the 2600, and the sound is identical. It just looks horrible and doesn't play much better. Avoid at all costs. It's NES time! Basically any MSX port Namco ever shat out got an NES version, and Galaxian is one of the better releases. Given this port was first released 5 whole years after the arcade release, it understandably manages to play nearly perfectly when compared to the arcade. The graphics are on point, the sound is quite close to the original, and I argue the game logic is better than the arcade. The hitboxes in the original are incredibly wacky at times, and the NES version fixes that. It feels more fair and fun to play compared to the arcade, at least to me. For once, the NES version of a Namco game is better than the arcade version. Am I dreaming? Next, it wouldn't be a ports video if we didn't cheat a little. My Arcade is a shit company that produces shitty products, and one of those terrible products is the Namco Museum miniplayer that was released in 2019 for a retail price of... Wait. Oh my god, you're joking. It's $130? Are you fucking kidding me?
Yep, that's the place.
Ow! Damn it, FedEx! Okay, come on. Keep professional. My friend Hella CIA on Discord bought one of these a while ago and has informed me that the emulation for Galaxian was, to put it bluntly, atrocious. He provided footage for this video, which you're seeing right now, and it's incredible how awful it looks and plays. The game runs at half the speed of the arcade version, and to be honest, you need to see it to believe it. I have genuinely no idea how this game runs as poorly as it does on this hardware. The Namco Museum mini player from my arcade uses Android hardware, and given the Galaxian is one of the simplest Namco games to emulate ever released, it's outright inexcusable. At least my arcade seems to be heading on a better path with their Space Invaders and Street Fighter 2 mini cabinets playing quite well, but that's spoiling a future video, so let's let that sit for now. Next up, the DOS port, which I really should have brought up when covering the Pac-Man ports, but hey, future videos are future videos, am I right? The DOS port of Galaxian is strange. It plays really slow, sounds atrocious, and is one of those games that runs at PC boot. That means it's got really nothing to work with in terms of PC hardware. It's very difficult to emulate properly, which is why I'm using footage from the YouTube channel The Video Games Museum for this video. It really is just too odd to put into words, so let's let the footage speak for itself. And now, it's time for the ColecoVision. Remember the ColecoVision? I remember the ColecoVision, and said ColecoVision has one of the best ports of Galaxian we've seen so far. The sound is pretty good, the graphics are pretty close, and the gameplay is quite solid. It for sure works better than the Atari versions, and while some herald this port as arcade perfect, which is definitely debatable, it's damn close. And for 1983, that's impressive. Next, it's time to talk Commodore. Classic 8-bit home computers are something I've never tackled on this channel before, so I think the VIC-20 port of Galaxian is a good spring point. Before we talk about this port, you should try to keep in mind the VIC-20 was about as powerful as a wet towel, so this game isn't going to look or sound very good. With that in mind, this game is actually one of the most playable ports in this video. The controls work great, the game runs at a fine speed, but sadly the visuals kinda stink. Once again, this is the VIC-20, which could hardly run a word processor, let alone video games. And with that, it's actually pretty great. Galaxian has been a mainstay on Namco Museum releases since the third volume was released on PlayStation in 1996. That same Namco Museum release is actually quite impressive for its time, being pretty much arcade perfect. Unlike its sequel Galaga's release on the first volume, there are no low-quality sound issues to be seen here. I was fully ready to give this port a lashing, but shockingly, it's pretty solid. I'm quite impressed, honestly. Thanks, Namco. Continuing on a CD-based console tangent, let's discuss a console that's lived its entire life in infamy. Philips is an electronics giant that was founded in 1891, and for almost 100 years they were riding high with no video game-related mistakes. But then the CEO decided he wanted to do something really funny and then shat out the CDI in 1990. This CD-based games console is infamous for its incredibly low-quality library with the likes of Zelda Wand of Gamelon, Hotel Mario, and the eternal classic
Link that faces of evil.
But hey, no matter how shit your original games are, surely you can't go wrong with some classic arcade games. Well, if you're thinking that, you'd be woefully, woefully wrong. The European exclusive CDI compilation, unimpressively named Arcade Classics, contains 3 classic Namco arcade ports. I really wish I had found out about this game when making the Galaga video, as it would have been a perfect subject for that. But hey, it also has Galaxian, so I can cover that one too, right? Galaxian on the CDI is strangely based off the MSX logic, but manages to butcher this solid port so well it's hardly recognizable. The game runs far too fast to be playable, has no sound outside of the opening jingle, and it's just... look at it. Look at it! If there was ever a game that perfectly encompassed the term words cannot describe, it'd be this. Honestly, I'm impressed. While on the topic of obscure game consoles, the Galaxian port to the Bally Astrocade is interesting to say the least. It's got primitive graphics and sound, but controls alright, and while the number of aliens on screen is more than half of the arcade, it still controls and looks fine. I guess Galaxian is just an easy game to get right. Let's wrap this video up with the Game Boy. Galaga and Galaxian were packed into the same cart when they released in the West, and similar to Galaga on the Game Boy, this port is a variant on the NES version of Galaxian. It's got the debatably improved gameplay of the MSX port, mixed with decent graphics and fine sound. It's not really a huge bang, but it's perfectly fine for what it is. Galaxian was huge, like insurmountably massive. It redefined what the arcade space shooter could be, and eclipsed the then 1-year-old Space Invaders in gameplay and graphics. Nowadays, Galaxian is forgotten for its more popular, and perhaps better, brother Galaga. But I really don't think that's fair. Galaxian is the reason that some of the best space shooters even exist, and is responsible for the boom in this genre that brought us Galaga, Viewpoint, the 1940 series, and Gradius. Galaxian is an incredibly fun, replayable classic, and should be remembered as such. I'm not quite done with arcade games yet, though. As alluded to earlier in this video, next time I'm going to be doing a massive roundup on miniature arcade cabinets. Stick around for that one, because it's going to be a mess.